Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. You know, I think we've all had that moment, right, where you glance in a mirror and you're like, wait a second, is that really me? That's kind of a freaky thought.
Mm.
But what if it wasn't just some fleeting thing? What if it was like a real, like a terrifying reality?
It is a bit unsettling, isn't it? The idea that the reflection staring back might have a life of its own.
Totally. And that's exactly the kind of unsettling territory we're going to explore today as we crack open this idea of identity and how fragile it can be,
hmm
and then the power of our minds. They can play some pretty crazy tricks on us. And we're diving into all of this through the lens of a psychological thriller, so buckle up.
I love a good mind-bending thriller. Always keeps you guessing.
Me too. And the book we're dissecting today is The Woman in the Mirror by Rosabelle Castenada, and don't worry, the link to grab a copy is down in the description. But here's the thing. This book isn't just about the thrills and chills. It really delves into what happens when memories get all jumbled up and that line between sanity and delusion starts to blur. It's like walking a tightrope,
hmm
you know?
It's fascinating how our perception of reality can be so easily manipulated.
Absolutely. And in this story, we follow a psychologist who starts experiencing the same creepy stuff as her patient. Talk about a nightmare scenario, right?
It really makes you question the boundaries between observer and observed, doesn't it?
No kidding. So if you're into stories that mess with your head, make you question everything, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into these kinds of mind-blowing stories.
All right, so let's jump into this world of mirrors and twisted perceptions. What's the setup here?
Okay, so we've got Dr. Lillian Hayes. She's a psychologist, and she starts to notice something really off with one of her patients, Claire Thompson. Claire's telling her that her reflection is doing things that she's not like it's moving independently and it's freaking her out.
So it's not just like a fleeting visual glitch. We're talking about consistent discrepancies between her actions and what she sees in the mirror.
Right, and it's not just that it's not matching her movements. It's like the reflection is doing things completely on its own. And Claire isn't just scared. She's like unbelievably sad, and there's this feeling that something or someone is missing. She even says the reflection looks like her, but it isn't me. It's like deeply unsettling, right?
That's a really powerful statement. It points to a sense of disconnect from one's own self-image, which can be a very disturbing psychological experience.
You got it. And so Dr. Hayes is a good psychologist. She's thinking, okay, what could be going on here? Her notes mention psychosis, maybe delusion or stress-induced delusions, like could her mind be playing tricks on her? She even considers stuff like dissociative disorder paranoia, a delusional system, or maybe early signs of schizophrenia. She's covering all the bases.
It's crucial to consider a wide range of possibilities before jumping to conclusions, especially when dealing with something as complex as human perception and mental health.
And here's where things get super interesting. After that first session with Claire, Dr. Hayes goes home and she's in her bathroom looking in the mirror, and she catches herself almost wanting to check if her reflection is out of sync too.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how potent suggestion can be. It's like Claire's experience planted a seed of doubt in Dr. Hayes's own mind.
For real.
Yeah.
And to make things even creepier, that very night, Dr. Hayes has this crazy dream. She's walking down this never-ending hallway lined with mirrors, and each mirror shows a different version of herself. Some are younger, some are older, some are sad, some even show injuries. It's like a visual representation of a fragmented identity.
Dreams can be very revealing. This could be her subconscious anxieties bubbling to the surface, maybe a fear of hidden aspects of herself, or even a recognition of a more fragmented identity than she's consciously aware of.
So what does Dr. Hayes suggest to help Claire deal with this freaky stuff?
Well, she starts with grounding techniques, which are ways to help someone stay present and connected to reality. Things like focusing on physical sensations, describing objects in detail, really listening to sounds, anything to kind of pull her back from the edge of that distorted perception.
Makes sense, like a lifeline to pull her back to solid ground.
Exactly. And she also tells Claire to keep a journal, like a really detailed one.
What kind of stuff is she supposed to write about?
Well, the idea is to document everything. When do the reflections act up? What's her emotional state like at that moment? Are there any particular circumstances that seem to trigger it? It's all about trying to find some kind of pattern or trigger, to make sense of the chaos.
Like a detective for her own mind.
Exactly. And speaking of detectives, there's this little detail that really stood out to me. Dr. Hayes starts getting these intense feelings of déjà vu during her sessions with Claire, like she's lived this exact moment before.
Well, that's trippy.
Right. But she just kind of brushes it off, thinks maybe she's mixing it up with something she read in a journal article.
You think she's right, or is there something more to it?
Well, it's interesting how our minds try to rationalize unusual experiences. to maintain a sense of normalcy. It makes you wonder how open we really are to things that challenge our understanding of reality.
Okay, so things are already pretty weird, but then it gets really creepy. Dr. Hayes gets a text from Claire that says, "They see you too. The mirror isn't safe." Chills, right?
Huge red flag right there. Definitely raises the stakes and introduces this element of an unseen force, maybe even a conspiracy. It's not just Claire's problem anymore.
And it doesn't stop there. Dr. Hayes starts experiencing her own share of weirdness. Little things at first, like a pen disappearing, then reappearing somewhere else,
Hmm.
her phone moving slightly when she knows she didn't touch it, an email vanishing from her inbox, the lights flickering, and probably the freakiest thing, she starts losing track of time during Claire's sessions.
It's like her own grip on reality is starting to loosen. It mirrors what Claire is going through, and that professional distance between them is starting to crumble.
And then it gets even more disorienting. Dr. Hayes starts getting lost in the facility where she works.
Hmm.
Hallways seem different, doors are labeled wrong, and she even remembers needing to feed a cat she doesn't own, but maybe had in the past. It's like her past and present are blending together, which is super freaky.
Those kind of disorientation episodes are really concerning. It suggests a potential breakdown in her spatial awareness and even her memory, which are so fundamental to our sense of self.
Then we meet Dr. Elias Mathis. He's Dr. Hayes' colleague. And he's like, "Hey, you seem really out of it lately. Are you okay?" He's noticing a change in her.
Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to make us realize something's wrong, especially when we're caught up in our own internal struggles.
So true. Now back to Claire. She's been keeping that journal like Dr. Hayes suggested, and her entries are getting even more disturbing. She writes about the reflection tilting its head blinking when she didn't. It's like it has a will of its own. And she feels this intense anxiety of coldness and panic. It's not just a visual thing anymore. It's like there's a presence in the reflection.
It's moving beyond simple perceptual distortions now. There's a sense of something autonomous in the reflection, potentially malevolent, and that's a terrifying thought.
But Dr. Hayes is still trying to find a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe it's tricks of the light or stress-induced hallucinations. She's holding on to her scientific framework.
As a scientist, it's understandable that she'd look for rational explanations. It's a natural human response to try and make sense of the unknown. But the evidence is starting to pile up against that.
Then there's this moment where Claire asks Dr. Hayes point blank, "Have you ever experienced anything like this with your reflection?" And Dr. Hayes admits that stress has sometimes messed with her perception, but she doesn't tell Claire the whole truth about what she's been experiencing.
That's an interesting choice. Maybe she's worried about crossing professional boundaries, or maybe she's just not ready to face the full extent of the weirdness herself.
And get this, Dr. Hayes starts feeling relieved when Claire has to reschedule an appointment. It's like their sessions are draining her energy somehow.
Could be a form of empathy overload, or maybe a subconscious recognition that their experiences are way too similar for comfort.
Okay, so now for the huge plot twist. Dr. Hayes discovers that there's no record of Claire Thompson ever being a patient at the facility. No intake forms, no digital files, nothing. It's like she never existed.
Whoa, that changes everything. It suggests a deliberate erasure of her existence,
Right.
maybe even a conspiracy. What's going on here?
Right, it's like someone's trying to gaslight her. Even Marianne, the receptionist, at first, she vaguely remembers a note about Claire, but then she's like, nope, never seen her before. It's like Claire is being systematically wiped from everyone's memory.
That's seriously creepy. It implies a level of control and manipulation that extends beyond just physical records. They're messing with people's minds.
Dr. Hayes tries to find Claire on the security footage from the lobby, and she sees this blurry figure that could be Claire, but it's too unclear to be sure.
It's like they're deliberately keeping her in the dark.
And then the cryptic texts from Claire's number get even more intense, like, "Stop looking into this," and "You're in danger." She's being warned to back off.
Clearly, someone doesn't want her digging any deeper. It's getting dangerous.
So Dr. Hayes tries to talk to her colleague, Dr. Mathis, about all this, about Claire disappearing from the records and everything. And he's like, "Are you sure you're remembering this right? Maybe you're just stressed." He's skeptical.
It's natural to question things, especially when they sound unbelievable, but it must be frustrating for Dr. Hayes to feel like she's not being heard.
Totally. And then to make things even worse, Dr. Hayes finds a sticky note in her own handwriting that says, "Don't trust them. Don't forget." But she has no memory of writing it.
That's a chilling reminder that something is seriously wrong. It's like a message from her subconscious, a warning she can't ignore.
And the memory gaps get worse.
Yeah.
She forgets locking her office door. A patient randomly calls her Claire. And Marianne, the receptionist, doesn't remember that phone call from Claire that she told Dr. Hayes about earlier. It's like her mind is falling apart.
That moment where the patient calls her Claire, that's really significant. It suggests a blurring of identities, a merging of self. It's really unsettling.
It gets even crazier. Dr. Hayes freaks out and goes to HR and IT to find her own personnel file. And guess what? They tell her there's no record of a Lillian Hayes working there. It's like she doesn't exist.
That's a terrifying realization. Her entire identity within the institution is being erased.
But then she goes home and finds her pay stubs and employment documents with her name and her staff ID on them, the same ID they said didn't exist. It's like proof that her reality was real at some point.
It's a small victory in the face of overwhelming doubt. At least she has some tangible evidence.
But then another patient, Sasha Price, disappears from the records just like Claire. It's a pattern.
It confirms that this isn't a random occurrence or a mistake. There's a deliberate system at play here, a disturbing pattern of erasing people.
And just when you think it can't get any more messed up, Dr. Hayes gets a text message that looks like it's from Dr. Mathis telling her to drop the investigation. But it's fake. Someone's trying to manipulate her.
They're using her trust in her colleague against her. It's insidious.
So she finally decides enough is enough, and she confronts Dr. Mendoza, the head of the facility, about the missing patient records and the fact that someone's clearly covering something up.
It's a bold move. She's putting herself at risk, but she's determined to get to the truth.
And at first, Dr. Mendoza seems like he's going to listen. He even mentions a ghost entry in the system logs related to Claire, so there's some trace of her existence in their records.
A glimmer of hope, maybe a sign that someone tried to erase Claire but wasn't completely successful.
But then Dr. Hayes overhears Dr. Mendoza and Dr. Mathis talking about her in secret behind a two-way mirror. Talk about a betrayal.
That's a huge blow to her trust. It makes her question everything and everyone around her.
And then comes the bombshell. Dr. Hayes finds a mislabeled patient file for someone named Claire Monroe, and the symptoms listed are exactly like what Claire Thompson and Dr. Hayes herself have been experiencing. Dissociation, memory problems, distorted reflections, all of it. And the photo in the file, it's Dr. Hayes. It says she was admitted over a year ago and there's no record of her being discharged.
Whoa, that's a major turning point. It suggests that Dr. Hayes might have been a patient in this very facility and that her entire life as Lillian Hayes could be a fabrication.
And the notes in the file are super creepy. They talk about patients feeling erased and not trusting the staff, and they even say that Lillian Hayes might be a fake name for Claire Monroe. It's mind-blowing.
It's like her reality is crumbling around her. Everything she thought she knew about herself is being called into question.
Dr. Hayes is completely lost. She's trying to make sense of her memories of being a psychologist with the fact that this file says she's a patient. It's a total identity crisis.
It's the ultimate psychological thriller scenario. Who are you when your memories and your identity are unreliable?
She confronts Dr. Mathis about that secret conversation she overheard, and he admits that he's learned some things that made him question how to help her, and he's worried about her. He's not being totally upfront, but he's definitely hinting that he knows more than he's letting on.
He's walking a fine line. Maybe he's trying to protect her in his own way, or maybe he's part of the cover-up. It's unclear at this point.
Dr. Hayes keeps digging, and she finds more old patient logs and another photo of herself this time in a hospital gown with the number 246 on it. It's more proof that she was a patient there.
It's like pieces of a puzzle falling into place, but the picture they're forming is terrifying.
The memory gaps keep happening, and new patient appointments keep showing up in her planner that she doesn't remember making. It's like someone's controlling her life.
It's a constant reminder that she's not in control. Someone or something is pulling the strings.
Her journal entries are getting more and more frantic, and she starts writing, "I am Lillian Hayes," over and over again, like she's trying to convince herself.
It's a desperate attempt to hold on to her identity as it slips away.
She finally breaks down and tells Dr. Mathis everything about the memory loss and the weird stuff happening with the data logs under her account. She needs his help.
It's a huge step for her to trust him like that. Maybe he's the only one she feels she can turn to.
She starts recording her therapy sessions because she can't trust her memory anymore. But then she starts to think someone's messing with the recordings too.
The paranoia is reaching a fever pitch. It seems like the manipulation is everywhere.
She's getting super anxious, and the mirror illusions come back even stronger this time. She hears a voice whispering, "Claire," from the reflection. It's like the lines between them are completely blurred.
It's like Claire is a part of her now, or maybe she's a part of Claire. It's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins.
And then boom, a memory comes flooding back. She remembers seeing Claire Thompson strapped to a bed in a restricted ward of the facility, babbling about reprogramming.
It all starts to click.
That's a huge revelation. It confirms that Claire wasn't making things up, and it suggests that something seriously messed up is happening in that facility. Then she finds sedatives planted in her office.
Yeah.
It was Nurse Grant who did it. She's trying to drug her and keep her quiet.
They're trying to control her, silence her, erase her. It's a terrifying thought.
She finds more security footage this time. She sees herself being dragged away in a hospital gown, all drugged up, and she sees Claire being taken to a locked room and hooked up to an IV.
It's all coming out now. The truth is undeniable. They've been experimenting on patients, drugging them, controlling them, erasing their memories. It's a nightmare.
And then, get this, her reflection talks to her. It says that Lillian Hayes isn't real, that she's a patient who created this persona, and that she'll be erased permanently if she keeps fighting.
It's like a manifestation of her own fractured psyche, a warning from her subconscious.
Dr. Hayes and Dr. Mathis, they decide they have to do something, so they confront Dr. Mendoza with the security footage and everything they know.
They're taking a huge risk, but they can't stand by and let this continue.
They help Claire escape from the facility, and they become fugitives. They're on the run.
It's a desperate measure, but they're doing what they have to do to protect Claire and expose the truth.
They meet with Dr. Mendoza at a motel, and he gives them a written statement saying that Claire's been released and that they're stopping the forced sedation on Dr. Hayes. It's like a truce, a way for him to cover his own butt.
He's trying to protect himself, but it's also a small victory for them. It's a step in the right direction.
Dr. Hayes goes to the facility's oversight board and tells them everything that happened, and they finally recognize that she's not crazy and they stop the forced sedation. But she loses her job.
It's a bittersweet victory. She's free from their control, but she's lost her career.
Even though it's over, the mirror illusions and the whispers of Claire don't go away, and she starts realizing that they're actually repressed memories connected to the death of someone named Daniel Cross. Her trauma is starting to surface.
The psychological scars run deep. It's going to take time and healing to overcome what she's been through.
Then comes the big realization, the restricted ward and the locked doors. It was all mostly in her head, a manifestation of her guilt over killing Daniel in self-defense. She could have left the facility physically, but she felt like she deserved to be locked up.
It's a powerful example of how our internal state can create our own prisons. She was trapped by her own guilt and trauma.
In the end, she has this final confrontation with her reflection, and she realizes that Claire is actually a part of herself, her repressed self. It's like she's finally integrating all the pieces of her identity.
It's a beautiful moment of healing and self-acceptance. She's coming to terms with her past and embracing her whole self.
And get this, Dr. Mendoza invites her to speak at a new oversight board meeting. He wants her to share her story and help change the system.
That's a powerful way to turn her pain into something positive, to advocate for reform and prevent others from suffering the same fate.
The book ends with Lillian accepting her past trauma, letting go of the guilt and embracing her freedom. She's free from the facility, free from her own internal prison, and free to move forward.
It's a hopeful ending. It shows that even after experiencing such profound trauma and manipulation, it's possible to heal and reclaim your life.
So there you have it, folks. The Woman in the Mirror.
It's a wild ride, right?
It really makes you think about the nature of reality and the power of the mind, how much of what we perceive is actually true, and what happens when the lines between self and others start to blur.
Exactly. It's a total mind trip. What about you, listeners? What resonated with you the most? Was there a moment that made you go, holy crap? Or something that just creeped you out completely?
We want to hear your thoughts. Share your favorite moments, your biggest questions, and the parts that scared you the most in the comments below.
Let's keep this conversation going about identity, memory manipulation, all of it. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of these fascinating and sometimes terrifying stories.